Hi, I'm Shoshie Goldstein-Nissenbaum, a Toenet Rabbanit, a halachic advocate, and a mediator, and welcome to my podcast. Today, we are privileged to hear from Jeff Friedman, who is, today, he's coming in the capacity of what's called tium hori, which is a parenting coordinator or a mediator specifically trained to deal with issues between parents. Besides for his advanced degrees, he has a Master of Social Work, a lifetime of a lot of experience in various different settings in Israel, including working for the Revacha, the social services, his private practice, and being appointed as a Mitzaim Hori by the family court to mediate between parents, and very often in high conflict situations to be the Ish Machria, to be the Ish Miktsoi, the Mumche, the professional who makes the final decision when the parents cannot come to a decision together. So today's topic that we're going to discuss with Jeff is co-parenting with a narcissist, which is a very hot topic these days. As I can tell you from my line of work, most of my clients, not all, but most, have a lot of difficulty post-divorce navigating the world of co-parenting, especially with a parent that they divorced because of poor communication skills, because they grew apart, because there's huge differences between them in how they see the world. And now they're divorced, but they still want to do what's best for the child. And I think all experts agree that what's best for the child is co-parenting. And the law demands, to a certain extent, co-parenting, where many decisions need to be made by both parents. So the big question, which always comes back, is how do you do this with a narcissist? Okay, so maybe we'll start with the lighter things, and we'll go into the heavier things, right? So the lighter things are, the constant changing of the parenting schedule, right? Where one of the parents, and I think maybe Jeff, if you could just debunk one myth for us, please, that I think a lot of women feel that only men are narcissists, and a lot of men feel that only women have borderline personality disorder. So could you just clarify what that means, what we're talking about when we say co-parenting with a narcissist?
Okay. Hi, Susanna, and thank you for inviting me, and hello to the audience. I'll talk a little bit more about my background, how I got to this the place of doing high conflict mediation. Indeed, I did have a social work degree and master's in training in psychotherapy from Hadassah, but I did get trained in mediation in the 90s in Israel when it was very new here, and that was kind of more normative mediation, and I put those in quotes, because the whole process of when you're talking about narcissism, you might want to think about it as a spectrum of descriptions of behavior. And, put it simply, when we all get hurt or we have a wound, we go inside ourselves and we kind of self-heal. We try to self-heal or defend ourselves. Some people are able to see outside of themselves, outside of their needs, and have a clarity between who they are, what their needs are, and who the other is. When you're talking about narcissism, that boundary is often diffuse. Now, there's also a spectrum, as I say, of narcissism, and also at moments in each of our lives, we have certain kinds of narcissistic behaviors. So you have to make a distinction when you're using that term. Are you talking about a personality disorder? Are you talking about an acute event that necessarily makes someone closed in? And of course, when there are acute issues regarding loss, like death or separation, one is necessarily going to go into oneself. And then this healing. So I want to put that as a kind of, I want to pin that up because it's really a whole subject, Shoshana, that we touched on, which is about the separation processes that lead to divorce and how that's managed and often mismanaged, and where it's often left as, and unfortunately often left exactly in the places why people get divorced. And it leaves people with anger, and they usually cut off, and there's blaming, and etc. And of course, the children often get siphoned into that emotional mayhem. So again, we're talking about a kind of a spectrum, and we're talking about a spectrum that could lead from acute reactions to pain to loss, to the other side, the polarity, which are really personality disorders. No, it's not true that only women or only men have narcissistic, obviously, disorders, nor borderline personality disorders. But again, you might want to use this as descriptions of behavior rather than closed structures, which are called personality disorders, which also exist. So there's a whole plethora of terminology that can be very confusing. And often, as in many words, we generalize. This person's a narcissist, I can't talk to them, they're just concerned with themselves. And of course, it's a very big demand on. So I'm going to start, Shoshana, with your cue, which is start light, and we could go heavy.
Right.
It's a very big onus, a load on couples who are divorcing, to say, you made a decision to divorce. That decision, if it's done well, there's a whole world called conscious uncoupling. That's the new terminology of a good divorce.
I love that terminology.
Yeah.
I love it.
Because it legitimizes that perhaps some relationships have limited time, and sometimes we're young and we don't know ourselves or don't know the other, and there's hurt and pain. But some people can uncouple, but they can recognize at some point they also have, thank God, they had kids or they had a family. There are good aspects of coming together and needing to leave. We all are trained, socialized, believing that divorce is bad. But we all know that sometimes you have to say a mazal tov to someone. And of course, if you could say it to both and they still function, that's the best of circumstances. They'll go to
I just want to point out something very, very an interesting side fact about uncoupling. In Yiddish, the word for divorce is ois chasna, which means to unravel the wedding, which is uncoupling, right? A wedding in marriage.
Excellent.
It's like
fantastic.
And it's so interesting that despite the fact that that's the way it's said in Yiddish, right? Ois chasna, as we spoke earlier, I find that the more Haredi my clients are, and even friends and people that I know who get divorced, it's the concept of uncoupling is so foreign. They're convinced that divorce means war. And that's what it means. Because there's this feeling of justifying to the courtroom of society that I'm okay. I'm the good one here, because there has to be a good and a bad. You can't just divorce, right? There's someone who did something wrong here, and it wasn't me, because I have to defend myself in the courtroom of society. So that ups the ante. And even if people are not narcissists, obviously my spouse, he's the one who decided to get divorced, and he pushed this or she pushed this, she ruined the family. And what you're saying here, it's not about divorce doesn't ruin a family. It's how you get divorced and how you behave afterwards. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Wonderful. Thank you. I thought ois means after in Yiddish.
It could.
Okay. It also makes sense, but I appreciate that term. I never heard. I know a bit of Yiddish, but I thank you for It's appropriate if the couple. So let's say this: it's painful. It's not a symmetric process. People have different rhythms.
Yeah.
One spouse could come to the conclusion that they have to move on, while the other one is scared and dependent, or mourning, or in a grief stage. As you know, divorce is likened to death processes. It's inherently a loss, or a change, or a transformation. The hope is that it can transform a family intact to a better situation. But most cases, there isn't the structures. We're not educated in our society.
Absolutely.
How to do this. So we have
we're lucky if we're educated to know what a marriage is, let alone to know how to get divorced.
Absolutely. And so, when somebody dies, we know we have a very beautiful Masoret of Sidim Shiva, etc. What do we know about getting divorced?
Right.
And I would hope that we can gain knowledge and wisdom as we develop as a society, with the tools, with psychology, with the evolution of ideas that allow people to make healthy choices, to define what is healthy, what's not healthy, where people get stuck. So I'll address this for a moment. If you have more or less intact couples that you're working with, and there's not that one of the couples is, say, more open to the idea of possibly getting divorced or clarifying. So
based on what you just said, there's a healthier way to divorce or uncouple or ois chasna. So can you share with us some tips, guidelines, skills, ideas about how to divorce in a better way so that post-divorce co-parenting can go smoother?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great, excellent question, because I think that there's as I said earlier, there's a lack of education about processes. So, often, in my training, for instance, the 90s, we trained in a thing called a certain kind of mediation called transformative mediation, excuse me, which says when one couple, and it often happens like this, one couple says, I want to get divorced, and the other one says, no, I don't want to. And that stage is called exploration. There's a stage before you make a decision. And that stage is critically important, because it enables the couple to say, okay, let's do a cheshbon nefesh, zugi. I'm sorry, I'm throwing in Hebrew. We have to translate. Let's do let's figure this out. The couple needs time to figure it out with help. Because I can't say how important getting help is from a trained couples therapist, or people who are trained in that transition between marital problems and clarification and exploration. Is it worthwhile? Do we have the koach? Do we have the ability? What did we want in this marriage? What failed? Can we work on it? Do we go to tipul? Do we need some kind of therapy? Today there's much more awareness, and that's very important to use that before you jump into a decision. Often jumping in, when you're not both jumping in, will lead to a succession of problems and anger and abandonment and blame.
And rack up a huge bill in litigation.
And rack up a huge bill. So there's a natural resistance that humans have to say, because you want to move on. The fantasy is, it's going to be great after. I want to move on. I want to get out of this. And it's very important to tell parents, especially, of course, when you have kids, The bad news is you're going to get a divorce, but you're going to always be in some kind of contact.
Right. God willing, forever.
God willing, forever. And the
Yeah.
question
You'll
is,
have grandchildren together, great-grandchildren together, all their many smachot that Bezrat Hashem will come with it.
absolutely.
And look at what our nation just went through now with all the tragedies. There were quite a number of children who were kidnapped, who were children of divorced parents.
How
And
interesting.
that was very painful to see. Parents, also chayalim who were murdered, that their parents are divorced, they didn't sit shiva. Kids who were murdered in the Nova, whose parents didn't sit shiva together because they're divorced and they moved on. I mean, I'm not making a judgment call whether they should have. That's their business. I'm just saying the fact that they each were alone mourning for their child is a horrific experience in and of itself.
So you're absolutely pointing to the high risks of bad divorces. There was a scholar named Judy Wallerstein who did a lot of research on children of divorce and correlated the degree of function between post-divorced or divorced parents functioning and cooperation and high risk levels of
Oh wow.
lower risk. When there's more functionality, more cooperation, it will minimize damage to kids. When there's more conflict, continued conflicts, the kids will be have higher risk, are in higher risk. So we're talking about preemptive. What could you do? What you're
did she compare that to children who lived in high conflict homes where the parents are married?
Oh, very good question. I think any exposure to high conflict is higher risk if it's not resolvable, if it's chronic. It's different when there's a conflict and there's a modeling of, even if there's high emotion. I'm not talking about abuse. Okay, that's a whole other
right. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic. We're talking about even screaming. There's a difference between resolution, closure. These terms that it means, there are ups and downs of marriages and family life. But when there's continued triggering of high-level conflict that's repetitive over time, there's a correlation of higher risk behavior amongst children, even in marriages. So what's the nature of conflict? What are we talking about? What do couples need from each other? And I loved what you said earlier, Shoshie. You said we don't even know what marriage is. Forget about divorce. We're not even indicating our emotional needs. Could we articulate them? Can we express them? Are we trained in knowing what we need and asking, how do we deal with vulnerability? We're so far from there. We're mostly defensive. We don't know what we need and how to ask. Very basic communication skills that are difficult because we're all scared, we're all shamed, and we all have needs, and we don't know how to manage it in ourselves, let alone communicating to another. So it does start. You could follow that line prior to marriage in your early life, in who you were as a single. And it's important to do that, to identify your own things, so that if you're really lucky, you can view even a divorce as a growth process. Mamash, and that's the uncoupling. That's the conscious uncoupling where couples can devolve out of the couple, but they create the co-parenting function. So what I said earlier, it's a very big weight on parents who don't have those skills, that are getting divorced, usually out of pain. And then you're asked, no, you still have to be in contact and you still have to co-parent. So there are workshops in the United States. I think I mentioned this to you, states, in the different states that require parents to go through workshops before the state will grant a divorce, how to co-parent. And it just doesn't exist here, and it doesn't exist in all the United States. So I would say like this. I outlined about 20 Esrima dibrot, not esera dibrot. There are a number of things that parents need to be mindful of when you're talking about keeping the kids safe enough from parental conflict. And this should be taught in a workshop. Parents need to go through a workshop. Maybe we'll think about this sometime.
Hey, as you're talking, I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing next.
So, all of this is, I'm not forgetting your question, because I know many listeners will say, well, that's all great, but you don't know my ex. Because we're talking about narcissistic parental, difficult, very difficult partners. And I want to get to that. But before you even get to that, you have to identify, we have to say a few things. We have to say, even the narcissistic parent and even the non deserve, need, require some kind of training. Very good if you have earlier on some kind of therapy for the couple that you evolve into as best as you can into some mutuality. So sometimes I've worked with couples and you want to say, look, you're in different places. Can you give a little place for a mutual mourning of the couple, of what you went through? Could you find words that are not blaming, that describe the pain, but you also brought beautiful kids into this world? I don't expect that and it's painful to go through this transition, but if you do this well and you're able to do the grief work, it's a big sugya. It's a big. So, narcissist. This is the general structure. When you're talking again, I'm mindful that this. It's funny. I understand this is your first podcast, and you're starting with the hardest cases of narcissism.
Because this is what I see the most.
Wow.
As much as I do, most of my work is pre-divorce, leading up to the divorce, and ends with the get.
Right.
Most of the time, I see that afterwards, my clients are suffering tremendously from this piece of co-parenting. Yeah. That it just, even in couples who had amicable divorces, who did mediation with we talk about real mediation, not manipulation, right? But where they tried to come and they successfully came to greet and met the other one in the middle and looked for solutions, and there was no who's right and who's wrong. It's just what is going to work for this family. What is the sustainable and best options for our children right now? Even those couples post-divorce, somehow, I mean, not all of them, but most of them call me a couple weeks later, a couple months later, I can't handle this. What do I do, right? And so that's with the couples who had a good divorce, right? The couples who had a poor divorce with high conflict, a lot of litigation, endless requests to the Beit HaDin, or it's just, for them, it even starts from the minute they separate, or sometimes even before, where it just nothing is going. They're just, instead of lessening the conflict, settling things, just adding ante, and everything's just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, so in cases like that, and as you said earlier, the court appoints a parental coordinator, hori, and because if the parents are not capable as a unit, one could be healthy, one could be narcissistic, but the parental unit cannot together make the proper decisions for the tovat yeladim, for the well-being of the child. Sometimes the courts will appoint in very conflictual cases that are continual, chronic conflict. They'll appoint a hori. Sometimes the hori even they're given judicial powers, samchut hachra'ah. Those are the hardest cases. And for me, I didn't come from I'm not a lawyer. I'm trained in psychology. You have to take on almost an opposite. You have to learn a whole set of skills, because you might be hated by one party. You're entering a minefield.
Absolutely.
And you have to be very, very clear. It's not easy work. So
No.
so it's much
Because
better.
here, in essence,
Yeah.
you are being awarded a certain authority over the children. It's being taken away from the
Yeah.
parents
Correct.
because they can't get their act together, or one of them can't get their act together. But as a unit, as you said, they're dysfunctional, and the
Right.
children are being neglected. I had a client who, I mean, she couldn't. Her ex would not allow her to do anything, not get the kids tested, an education evaluation. Any doctor that wasn't like the family doctor for a throat ache or a stomach ache, she had to get his signature, and he would never sign. And we were constantly going back to court because and this was in the family court, constantly going back to court again and again and again until the judge said to her ex, I just want to let you know that I will always side with her. And if I see you in my courtroom one more time for bothering me for not signing that the kid could have a tutor, I am going to fine you. And that was the end. But that took 3 years of, he wouldn't sign anything, right? The kids couldn't get tutors. They couldn't go to therapy. It was like ridiculous. But that's, he was punishing her for divorce, right?
Right.
And using the children as shahidim, as holy warriors in their, jihad, their holy war against each other. And that was an extreme case.
Correct.
But I've had many other cases like that where we've had to go to court for a child to see a doctor, for a child to participate in school activities, in youth groups and things like that, where the parents like, no, I don't let. Now, and of course, why do they say they don't let? Because it's not really the other parent is taking the child to that doctor because she wants a certain diagnosis, because she wants, or sometimes they're scared certain things will come up in this therapy session. But I think that is probably one of the most common fights that I have between parents, and that is therapy. And you'll have a parent who will say, no, I only want in the revacha. I only want in a private. I want this person.
Right.
Oh, but that person, and they're going to report to the court whatever you tell them to say. And there's no one who's neutral in the entire world, right? And those get really, really, the children suffer tremendously, and the parents suffer, including the parent who doesn't allow their child to have the therapy or see the doctor, because in the end of the day, even through osmosis, I believe that the child feels mikupach, the word is in Hebrew. They're like, it's a certain kind of, here's another Hebrew word, hitzolelut.
Abuse or
it's a lighter word than abuse, hitzolelut. Alimut would be abuse. Hitzolelut would be like a lesser form of abuse. And it's sad. What?
No, it's going to say alimut is violence.
Alimut is right.
Hitalalut is abuse. Hitalalut rigshit or hitalalut physic. There are all kinds of categories of this notion of. But what you were saying is very. Those are the difficult cases, and you want to prevent it. It's about if this podcast, if you're launching, if the crusade would be to prevent these kinds of things, it's a big mitzvah. It's a big
We should have this clue. So let's get back to you,
let's
and
get back to it. So,
preventing that, especially when you're dealing with these impossible people.
Yeah. So, first of all, you have to talk about prevention. What could you do? What's the best you could do? If there really is a personality disorder, of narcissistic disorder, a borderline disorder, whether it's the male, the father, the mother, that's very, very problem. Most cases don't have that label. But if they do, you're going to absolutely need a triangulated, you're going to have to get triangulated with a professional to guide the parent to parenting, and the courts are tired of it. They don't want to, excuse me, they don't want every time. So they develop this mikzo. I'm doing it maybe 7-8 years, and I limit my cases because they're so overwhelming. They're so overwhelming, and they bring you right into the heart of conflict, the heart of darkness, the heart of conflict. So prevention is wonderful, and education is right, and all those things are good, and you really have to start from there. There are cases you're going to need professional help. There's no doubt about it. And you're going to need the lawyers who represent these people, who have a little sechel, and they're going to say, you have to get them to say, yeah, we also agree we need help, because there are books written, there is literature how to deal with a narcissistic parent. It's a very, very hard demand on the parent who's healthier, who's not narcissistic, and that's with learning skills, strategic skills. You could call them almost manipulative skills, but you have to complement the narcissistic parent. You have to make them feel, but with directing at the same time. The example you had given of the child that the mother wanted to take the child to a doctor, the father wouldn't sign. Without knowing any details of the case, but if you're talking about strategic approaches toward dealing with narcissists, you have to say, okay, what kind of legitimation, does the father need to feel about his fathering? Because there's a compensation going on there. He really feels terrible, and he's overcompensating. Whatever he's doing, whatever mechanisms he's using, the narcissism is undermining. It's undermining because of some experience he has internally, and he needs a lot of help if he could even benefit from the help, because people aren't so available to, if you have a disorder, to get help. That requires a lot of strength of character to say, okay, I'm going to look honestly at myself. Most cases are not like that. So there are trainings of how to write, how to engage in a healthy, how to be flexible enough, how to be very wise. If you're healthy and you know your spouse, the important thing about narcissistic behaviors is that they're often predictable. They're patterns. You can predict what the person's going to do. So if you have coaching with this, you might have a chance of forging through writing, not speaking. You could use tools of writing. They're sometimes much better to write WhatsApps, emails, than frontal engagement. So there are strategies, but it's a lot of work. It's there's no 100% guaranteed of success, but there are ways that you need to dialogue when you're engaged with a narcissistic parent who's not cooperative.
There's an amazing app that just came to Israel called Our Family Wizard, which is mandated in many states in America, right. Where parents don't communicate directly, they communicate only through this app. Do you think something like that would help with a narcissistic parent?
I think it's a wonderful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That was my question. Is it a good tool for co-parenting or with a narcissistic parent, or does that actually take away from them what they really want, which is the attention or the feeling of being a parent and making a decision, control? It's about them. So the app takes away. It's not about them. It's cold, right? Which is why it works with two healthy parents or even semi-healthy parents, because it's not about me anymore. It's just cold decisions. It's cold numbers. But the narcissist wants that. He wants something from these and he's not going to get it from that. So would it help?
So, we're not talking about a holistic prescription for, if you're talking about help, absolutely, it's a great app. And actually, from speaking with you, I know you're going to eventually have Judge Philip Marcus on here. And
next week,
I've actually sat with him and talked about this app because I've used it with couples, and I know in America, it also it's a user-friendly app in that it has all the documents that you need for the kids, and it has the expenses and sheets of, and it has communication, and could include a professional, and you can't really erase things on it, and so it's used sometimes in the courts, actually, as documentation in the United States. And I don't know how it's used here yet, because it's very new here, but you could use it. There's a certain payment, a little payment, $100 a year or something.
Money. Yeah.
Not a lot, but it's it organizes very well. You don't have to speak. It has the scheduling of the doctor's appointments, the dentist appointments, the chugim. You don't have to, and it's user friendly. So what you want to do in cases of, put it this way, tension, and again, draw a continuum to narcissistic high conflict, you want to have as least contact as you can with the others, with your ex. You want to have a cleaner boundary. If you and in order to do that, you want to have things in place. So the appointments are in place. You know the scheduling. You have the medical documents. If there's a need of a signature, you could put it on there. The other person could sign. They could put it back up. You don't have to. You don't have to speak. And of course, that's also a very smart strategy to limit limit the amount of contact in high conflict. Okay, because our subject today, is high conflict, and high conflict does not have easy remedies. But you want to put in strategic modes that will help limit the contact. Transitions of kids moving from house to house, you do it around natural settings of schools, of chugim. Don't have the other spouse come to your house if you can. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but those kinds of things. But perhaps I'll say something on the general principles that you want to avoid, because I want to take it back to education. Because when you're talking about the high conflict narcissistic, so I said you could either, it's a spectrum. How much are you triggered? If you're the healthier parent, if you feel you're the healthier parent, you need to see how triggered you are. And what I mean by triggered means what happens to you when your ex is impossible. How do you deal with your rage, your anger? Are you triggered into a reaction? Of course, once you triggered into a reaction, you're lost in the enmeshment. We call that enmeshment.
Oh boy, yes. Yeah.
So a lot of these strategies are about creating the mindful space, this wonderful movement of mindfulness that we talk about, not to fuse with your reactions. Very hard. It's very demanding.
Very hard.
Very hard. So let's
it
say
requires that even the healthy parent, or the one, I loved what you said, the one who thinks they're healthy, right?
yeah,
Everyone's going to say, including myself, right? That I'm divorced from my children's father for 6 years now, 7 years. And, definitely, we all think we're the healthy parent, right? That's the way it goes. So, and it's tremendous. It is constant work. You think this happened, so many years ago, but every once in a while, a trigger comes up.
Yeah.
And I think you're so right. And then how we behave towards the children. What do we do with our rage? Where do I go with this, right? What coping skills do I have to remind myself, like you said, mindfulness. This is a trigger. This is just a trigger, right?
Exactly.
When we were little on television, they had this is a test. This is just a test, right?
Absolutely. So you want to,
because otherwise, you're right. We get dragged into it to be our worst selves.
Yeah. So you might want to say, one could say that the distinction between a narcissistic parent and a non-narcissistic parent is the ability to move away and to examine your reactions and try with a lot of work and help. Don't be scared to go to therapy. Don't be scared to get trained in mindfulness work, which maybe we'll have to talk about. I don't know your experience, Shoshana, with that, but some training in how to not to fuse, we call that, with your reactions. Very hard. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay.
This is a bombshell, what you just said, because you're in essence telling us that the difference, if I got this right, the difference between let's not call it a diagnosis of narcissism, but the tendency, or as you said in the beginning, the spectrum, the lower we are in the spectrum is how we can look at ourselves and separate and the trigger from the reaction, so to speak, and be able to see, wait a second, my ability to put myself in a mindful place and realize really where I am, and who my ex is, and that I need to be here right now not for myself, but for my children. And it really is being here for myself. So that's amazing, because that's really saying that the healthy parent, or as we said before, the one who calls themselves the healthy parent, they have a tremendous amount of control.
Yeah. Right.
Like what we usually think, that the narcissistic parent, they're the ones with all the control, and I'm the victim. So here it's reclaiming myself, that wait a second, I could actually make decisions for myself. I don't have to get sucked into this a tornado of emotions right now. I don't have to do that. I have a choice. It's a lot of work.
A lot of work. And I agree with everything you said. That's why I said maybe the difference between the narcissistic parent is somebody that can't do that. They can't leave their self-referential space.
Wow.
Their wounded space.
And during the divorce process, that is really hard to do, because part of mourning is coming into myself and being more with myself. So dafka, to do this work at a time of divorce, separation, and post-divorce, where the grieving is so great, it's even more challenging. But you're really giving everyone a light at the end of the tunnel, that we don't have to be enslaved to our triggers and to the narcissistic parents' moods and no's and back and forth and yes and no and changes of schedule and the books getting lost and the Shabbos shoes never coming back. And no, I can be different. I can choose, not ignore it, not pretend it doesn't exist, but to actually deal with it. I think you gave people a lot of hope right now.
Oh,
even though that hope comes with a lot of hard work. But it's
hard work,
hope.
and you need help. You could get professional mediators if your culture doesn't go to media. I don't know the kinds of. You said you work with, you're in Tzfat, and you work. I'm sure you work all over the country, but let's say people aren't so open to having outside. What about? Are there people that you both can trust that can help you, that are willing to be helpful? That's, not everyone wants to or should get, to get a friend or someone involved in these kinds of things are problematic. But,
right. It has to be a professional.
It has to really be a professional.
And most of the time it needs to be a court-appointed professional.
Yeah.
The other side is, positive that any name that I bring is definitely off the table.
I mean, even with court, I have very hard cases that somebody's inevitably going to accuse you of being for the other side, and you have to be very anchored to do this work as knowing the aseret hadibrot of what kids need to experience. That has to be you have to help parents start viewing this whole area from the perspective of the child. What is the child experiencing between two homes? What are they experiencing when the kid has a different message from you or a negative message, and they have to go to the other home? What do the parents are separate. They don't have to deal with each other. The child is an emissary of both homes. Are they going to integrate both homes, or are they going to do fragmentation, splitting? We call this splitting. There's not schizophrenia, but emotional splitting inside. These are damaging elements that are a product of not protecting the kids and not do. So one, yes, get help. Two, get help for yourself to learn how to have more space, so you're not pulled in, you're not triggered into an immediate response, but that you learn to have your dalet amot of shikul dat. How do you manage this other person? It's a management issue. If you're the healthier parent, if you feel like you're the healthier parent, sometimes you have to be flexible. You have to have discerning what's worth a fight, what's not. He wants an extra hour here and there. Oh, but it might lead to another 2 hours, maybe. But are you going to get, what's worth, how do you manage? And it's about a management.
How do you make that decision when, one of the parents says, I need another hour with the kid, or the kid, they don't say, I need another, the kid wants to stay with me another hour or two.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
And if some people, if you give them a finger, they take a whole hand. And on the other hand, like pardon the pun, on the other hand, like why make a big deal about an hour or two?
Yeah. Absolutely correct. Because in the higher conflict cases, you don't want to negotiate all the time. You want to have what you call, and here's another term, parallel parenting.
Not co-parenting, parallel parenting.
Parallel parenting.
Okay, this is new. I'd like to hear about that.
So parallel parenting is when you're really with these kinds of high narcissistic, call it angry, conflictual, continued chronic conflict over years. You need boundaries, because what we spoke about earlier, when the healthier parent is triggered, that's a symptom of what was the emotional enmeshment of this couple, that people lost their secha, they lost their identity, they got pulled into a mayhem, a balagan. And you need very clear boundaries. So in cases, so there's a correlation between higher conflict and more rigid boundaries, protective boundaries, parallel parenting. You have them Tuesdays and Thursdays, have 1 to 5. No, very, very little changes. Sometimes you need to change. There's a wedding, there's that. Those are reasonable. There's a thing called reasonability. Is it reasonability? Sorry?
A kid is sick, a parent is sick.
Parent is sick, is a bar mitzvah. Yeah, those are reasonable. But if it's manipulative, and if people have people are disorganized, or they're super ADD.
Yes.
Sometimes, unfortunately, that there are books written about ADD and divorce, or ADD and marriage. And I'm not, I may myself have a little ADD. It's not, we all have a little, concentration pocket. So we're talking about extremes. And of course, so the focus would be what I was pointing to, this parallel parenting is essential in cases where the boundaries and expectations from one another are not in place. They're not reasonable. They're always changing. They're always requesting more. You need din, mishurat din, and you need
strong boundaries with a huge high wall.
A huge high wall, a protective wall, and those are more those are higher walls, and there'll always be attempts to breach those walls, and a lot of testing of the walls,
and build tunnels underneath the walls.
And look at our metaphors of our day. Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to, if we would run a workshop, we would say to the following as again, we're looking at things as a spectrum. There are moments when there's higher conflict, less higher conflict. There are personality disorders, but sachakol, how do you define a healthier divorce? How do you protect kids? And there are some rules, like you don't speak. The child doesn't want to hear. They should not hear. You speak negatively about the other parent. These are very clear and obvious.
Right.
You don't want to bring the child. The parent is part of them. You're going to speak negatively about the other parent, lashon hara, ke'ilu, about the other parent. They have to live with the other parent. They love the other parent. It's like you're speaking lashon. You're putting down who they are. You're going to cause conflict. Don't do that. It gives a very. It's a an uprooting feeling for the safety of the child when their loved ones are attacking each other. It's bad enough, it's hard enough when you have two homes, but the emotional home of I can rely on these two parents whom I'm supposed to love, who are supposed to love me, and they're enemies. It's too much. What do you expect from the child? We'd have to, in the workshop, have to go deep into these ideas. That's an example. Of course, I want to list a few if you're with your,
Yes.
but I don't know if we should, you guide me in terms of a discussion or not.
Yeah, maybe list another one, and then we'll wrap up. And I think we're going to need another
Good.
podcast. We have so many things that
there's so
we
many
started touching, and
Yeah.
and then we'll talk about offline. We'll talk about developing this workshop.
Yeah, and
maybe we'll get Judge Marcus involved too.
Yeah. I would say that
this is literally saving the lives of children.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting statistic. Every year, the Beit Hadin publishes at the end of the year statistics. How many divorces there were from each city, how many divorces there were from Olim, people who are not native Israelis. The divorce rate amongst Olim is sky high. It is more than 50% the normal divorce amongst Israeli natives. And most of those divorces are Anglos, because many of the Olim from Russia do not get divorced in the Beit Hadin for various reasons. I don't want to get into politics and halachic, but that's just a fact. So you're talking about the majority of those are either Ethiopians or Anglos. Okay, the Ethiopian community also has a high rate of divorce. So when we're talking about Anglos, right? You made Aliyah, I made Aliyah. Our listeners, most of them made Aliyah, or their parents made Aliyah. We're talking about a much higher risk of divorce, and therefore a much higher risk of post-divorce conflict, and a much higher risk of their children, being at risk for all kinds of delinquent behavior or different mental illnesses, which are not organic, but are onset because of the suffering of the children through this divorce.
Absolutely, right.
Really, so if you could conclude with another example, a good, strong example from the 20 Dibrot.
Yeah, I'll get back to that. And as I told you earlier, I'm finishing a book with little stories, because I want to suggest that your clients, or the audience may want to, if you open this up, they might want to share a story or two. And if we continue in a workshop form or a discussion, we could take a story, deeply go into it. But one of the, often what happens, as an example, you also don't want to share with kids. They shouldn't be involved in the monetary issues, in mizonot. And often you find kids, I have cases, they go to one of the parents, say, how come you're not giving Ima mizonot? He gives mizonot. She feels she needs more. The kids become an emissary. You don't want to turn them into shlichim, into messengers. Keep them in their child space, not their adult role, an adult role of an advocate. And this is, it's on physical, concrete issues like mizonot, and it's on emotional issues as well. These are,
and even and I know as a divorced parent, right, how hard it is when your kid comes to you again and says, "Oh, mommy, I need shoes," and the first thing I want to say out of my mouth is, "Go ask your father," right? Why should I pay for the shoes again, right? That's the first thing that I want to say, and it's like, okay, you need new shoes, right? Like that's between,
absolutely.
You have to constantly remind yourself.
That's why our family wizard is good like that. It also has a sheet. It divides up expenses, and if you're reasonable parents, you could use that to say, look, we got to divide expenses. Our Jose Gerushin should have that in it, so that
Absolutely.
we know you want the contract to prevent conflict. You want it to have, and maybe that's your domain.
That's and what's interesting is that most, when I start getting into those things, the couples who are in a good place, like, no, we don't need to go into that detail. And I'm like, that's what you're saying now, right? But if we go into that detail, you really will never need to go into that detail. That's it in a mediation setting.
Excellent
right?
answer. Yeah.
Where let's put it down to who is buying the shoes, and I have a shita when I do a mediation. I mean, I can't force this you can't force anything in mediation either, but in litigation, certainly not. But I don't like children going back and forth with a suitcase between Ima's house and Abba's house. To me, you have two houses. A child that goes with a suitcase, first of all, it's embarrassing that they have to bring a suitcase to school. Second of all, it's an old. It's like it's a pain in they don't have their house is usually it's with the mother, and they're visiting their father. And to me, that's inappropriate. They live in Ima's house and they live in Abba's house, and they have things, everything they need in Ima's house, including sometimes I again, I can't force this, but I tell parents, each of you buy a set of the school books so that there's never, he has everything he needs here and everything he needs. He has two houses. And I think, sometimes it's expensive. It is expensive. It's more money, right? Because instead of buying one pair of shoes, the kid needs two pairs of shoes. But to me, it's that is calming, and it's stable, and it's right that they're not a guest in their father's house. They're not visiting. Like, the word visitation is old school.
Right.
We don't use it anymore.
Yeah.
We don't even use custody anymore, right?
Yeah. Shahut,
So
right.
You work out all these things in the agreement, and my agreements are really, really long. And there's one guy in Yerushalayim who tells me, why is your agreement 30 pages long? And I'm like, so that they won't come back here again. Like, we don't want to come back here again.
Right.
But in litigation, we'll never get that. That'll never work.
Right. Correct. Yep.
Nope.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. I gained here a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure our listeners did too. And I'm looking forward to doing this again.
Wonderful.
And we'll talk more about the workshop.
Okay. Very good.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.